At 73 years old, Loretta Mae Bishop believed that a long marriage was a kind of bank account, the kind where every kindness, every quiet sacrifice, every meal cooked and shirt ironed and bedside vigil kept, slowly added up into something safe. After 38 years of being Wendell Bishop's wife, she walked into a downtown Houston law office, expecting the will reading to be a difficult afternoon and nothing more. By the time the attorney finished speaking, the room had gone so still she could hear the secretary in the next office answering a phone. Loretta wasn't simply left out of her husband's final wishes. She was wiped clean off the page, the way a chalkboard is wiped at the end of a long school day. 3 decades of love reduced to a rusty key, a hand-drawn map, and a drive into a part of Texas she had never once heard her husband mention. What those polished, perfumed stepchildren did not yet understand, what they were too greedy and too sure of themselves to suspect, was that Wendell had been preparing for this exact afternoon for 38 years, and the place he was sending her was not a punishment. It was the only honest gift he had ever managed to give her in his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, if you have ever buried a man and then realized at the funeral that you barely knew the family standing behind his casket, if you have ever wondered whether the love you gave for decades was real or just the politeness of a long contract, this story is for you. You are with Dreams Don't Age, and you are exactly where you belong this evening. Stay with Loretta. The first hour will hurt, and I will not pretend otherwise. But the second hour will remind you why some women are not finished at 73. Some women are only just beginning. Loretta Mae was 35 years old when she married Wendell Bishop in the spring of 1987, in a small Methodist chapel on the west side of Houston with 20 folding chairs set up in 2 crooked rows. She had been a bookkeeper at the same oil and gas firm where Wendell was a senior partner. She wore a cream-colored suit she had bought on sale at Foley's, and she carried 3 white roses tied with a piece of green ribbon she'd cut off a hat. Wendell was 47, 12 years older, a widower with 3 children and a Houston address book the size of a phone book. His first wife, Adelaide, had died of ovarian cancer the year before, and the children, Garrett at 14, Marisol at 11, and Tucker at 8, were already half feral with grief by the time Loretta entered the picture. Garrett told her at the wedding reception, in a voice loud enough for the closest table to hear, that she was wearing the wrong color, that real brides wore white, and that his mother had worn white when she'd married his father in a real church with real flowers. Marisol, who was 11 and already had the sharp little face of a woman who would one day spend significant money on it, refused to look at Loretta for the entire ceremony. Tucker, the youngest, asked Loretta in the receiving line whether she was going to live in their house now, and when she said yes, he started crying so hard his aunt had to take him outside. Loretta did not cry that day. She did not cry the night Garrett left a dead lizard in her shoe a month later, or the morning Marisol cut up her wedding photograph with kitchen scissors and left the pieces on the kitchen counter. She did not cry the first Christmas when she bought each of the 3 children a wrapped gift, written out in careful script with her own handwriting, and watched all 3 boxes go unopened under the tree until the new year. She just kept setting the table, kept driving to the orthodontist, kept showing up at the school plays in the 3rd row because Adelaide's sister always took the 2nd. For 38 years, she did exactly that. She remembered every birthday. She wrote checks for every graduation, every wedding, every grandchild's christening. She kept Adelaide's photograph on the mantel because Wendell wanted it there, and she dusted it every Wednesday morning along with the rest of the living room. When Garrett bought his first house in the Woodlands, she helped him pick out the kitchen tile. When Marisol divorced her first husband, she let her stay in the River Oaks guest room for 6 months. When Tucker got into trouble at his investment firm in 2009, she was the one who drove down to Galveston to fetch him from the rented condo where he'd been hiding from his colleagues. None of them ever called her mom. Garrett called her Loretta. Marisol called her Loretta in person and my father's wife when she introduced her to friends. Tucker called her ma'am, the way you'd call a waitress at a steakhouse. Wendell himself was kind to her in his careful, distracted way. He provided well. He bought her a Cadillac every 6 years on the anniversary of their wedding. He sent flowers on Valentine's Day, always white lilies, never roses. He held her hand at the symphony. He never raised his voice. He never raised his hand. But there had always been a part of him she could not reach, a back room of his mind he kept locked even from himself, and she had learned not to knock on it. He traveled, of course. All Houston attorneys at his level traveled. But Wendell traveled in a particular pattern that Loretta had noted, with a bookkeeper's quiet attention for nearly 4 decades. One weekend a month, sometimes 2, he disappeared. He said he was going to a hunting cabin a colleague kept near Junction. He said he was going to visit a client in Midland. He said he needed quiet, and a man at his age was entitled to quiet. She never argued. She never asked. She had grown up watching her own mother ask too many questions and pay for it with a long, sour marriage, and she had decided early that her marriage would be different. She would trust her husband. She would keep the house clean. She would believe him when he said he was going to a hunting cabin near Junction. That trust, she would learn far too late, was the slow, careful foundation on which a stranger had been quietly building her a future. Wendell Bishop died on a Sunday afternoon in late February in his own recliner with the Houston Chronicle open on his lap and a half-finished cup of black coffee on the side table. Loretta had gone out to the back garden to cut a sprig of rosemary for the pork roast, and when she came back through the screen door 15 minutes later, she knew before she set the rosemary down. The house had a particular quality of silence she had not heard in 38 years. The paramedics were kind. The funeral was enormous. Wendell had been one of the most respected oil and gas attorneys in Houston for half a century, and the cathedral on Main Street filled with judges, senators' aides, 2 former mayors, and what looked like every senior partner from every firm inside the 610 loop. Garrett, Marisol, and Tucker sat in the front pew with their spouses and grown children. Loretta was placed in the second pew, beside an empty space the funeral director had reserved, he explained gently, in case she had family members coming in from out of town. She had no one coming in from out of town. Her parents had been gone for years. She had been an only child, and 38 years of being Mrs. Bishop had quietly thinned her old friendships down to Christmas cards. The second pew felt exactly like what it was, a small public notice that she belonged near the family but not quite in it. Speaker after speaker stood and praised Wendell Bishop, the brilliant litigator, Wendell Bishop, the devoted father, Wendell Bishop, the patron of the Houston Bar Association. Not one of them mentioned a wife. Not one of them said her name. At the reception afterward at Garrett's house in River Oaks, Loretta carried her plate of catered shrimp out onto the back patio and sat alone on a wrought iron bench, and she heard Marisol on the other side of the boxwood hedge telling a friend, in a voice meant to carry, that it was such a comfort to have the real family together at a time like this. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday at the offices of Philip Reyes Whitlock, the estate attorney who had handled Wendell's affairs for the last 22 years. Loretta dressed in a navy dress and the pearl earrings Wendell had given her on their 10th anniversary. She took the elevator up to the 28th floor of a building on Smith Street, and she sat across a long walnut table from her 3 stepchildren and their 3 lawyers, and she folded her hands in her lap and waited. Philip Reyes Whitlock was a tall, careful man in his late 60s who had been to her house for dinner perhaps 20 times across the years. He could not quite meet her eyes. He cleared his throat twice before he began, and Loretta recognized that throat clearing for what it was. She had been a bookkeeper. She knew the sound a man made when he was about to deliver bad arithmetic. The estate, he said, was valued at approximately $14.6 million. The River Oaks home, the investment portfolios, the partnership equity in Wendell's old firm, the vacation property in Galveston, the art collection. Loretta felt her shoulders drop a quarter inch. $14.6 million was more than enough. Wendell had been quiet about money the way some men are quiet about religion, and she had assumed there was a plan, the way she had always assumed there was a plan. Philip began to read. The River Oaks home went to Garrett, Marisol, and Tucker, equally divided. The investment portfolios went to Garrett, Marisol, and Tucker, equally divided. The Galveston property went to Tucker. The art collection, including the 2 Remington bronzes Loretta had spent 4 months helping Wendell acquire, went to Marisol. The partnership equity, the largest single asset, went into a complex trust for Wendell's 3 children and his 5 grandchildren. Across the table, Garrett was already smiling. Marisol was studying her ring. Tucker had his phone in his lap and was thumbing through it under the edge of the table. Loretta heard her own voice come out very small. "Philip, what about me?" Philip looked at her then, and he looked sorry. and Loretta has remembered that look every day since. He said, "I argued with him about this language, Loretta. I argued with him for 2 hours. He insisted on the wording. I have to read it as he wrote it. I am very sorry," he read. "My wife of 38 years, Loretta Mae Bishop, has lived in comfort and security at my expense throughout the entirety of our marriage. She has wanted for nothing. She has had the use of my home, my name, my standing in this city, and a quality of life she could not have provided for herself on a bookkeeper's salary. This represents adequate compensation for the companionship and domestic management she has rendered. My obligations as a father and as a bishop run first to my blood, to my 3 children, and their children after them. They are my legacy. Therefore, to Loretta Mae Bishop, I leave the following. 1 property located at 1187 Cedar Creek Road in the town of Ardmore Springs, Texas, including all improvements, livestock, and contents thereon. Said property is conveyed to Loretta Mae Bishop with the express condition that she vacate the River Oaks residence within 30 days of my death, as that residence is required by my rightful heirs." Philip slid a manila envelope across the walnut table. His hand was not quite steady. Inside, Loretta found a heavy iron key the color of old rust, a deed transferred to her name, and a single sheet of Wendell's cream stationery folded once. His handwriting on the front of the envelope, neat and slanted to the right, the way she had watched him write thousands of letters in 38 years. The note read, 1187 Cedar Creek Road, Ardmore Springs, Texas. Loretta, drive there soon, before they ask questions you cannot answer. Trust me one last time, my girl. I owed you better than I gave. I am trying to give you better now, with every part of me. Wendell. Across the table, Garrett laughed. He actually laughed, a short bark of relief, and then tried to cover it with a cough. Marisol said, "Oh, Daddy," in a voice that was halfway too amused, and Tucker did not even look up from his phone. The estate attorney representing Garrett asked in a brisk professional tone whether the Cedar Creek property had been appraised. Philip said it had not been appraised in 20 years. The attorney said, "Well, we can certainly assume it is not material to the larger estate," and Garrett said, "Sounds like a shed." Loretta closed the envelope. She stood up on legs that did not feel attached to her. She picked up her purse. She walked out of the conference room without saying one word to anyone, and she made it to her Cadillac in the parking garage on the second sublevel before she sat down in the driver's seat and put both hands flat on the steering wheel and cried in a way she had not cried since she was a child. The 30 days that followed were the cruelest 30 days of Loretta's life, and she had lived through some hard ones. Garrett, Marisol, and Tucker did not wait. They arrived at the River Oaks house the following Monday morning with a real estate agent, a stager, 2 contractors, and an interior designer. They walked through every room with measuring tape and clipboards while Loretta sat at the kitchen island drinking tea. They did not ask her to leave any room. They did not lower their voices when she was within earshot. They behaved as if she were a piece of furniture that came with the listing. The designer suggested knocking down the wall between the dining room and the den to create what she called a more current footprint. Marisol agreed. The contractor measured the kitchen for a complete tear-out. The stager said the master bedroom needed to be fully repainted in greige and the family photographs removed before any showing. The family photographs included Loretta's wedding picture from 1987, 3 of her father, and the framed cross-stitch her mother had made for her bridal shower in the only month she had been able to get out of bed before her cancer took her. Loretta took those photographs down herself the next morning at 6 a.m. before anyone arrived and packed them into a banker's box. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The nights were the worst. Loretta lay in the bed she had shared with Wendell for almost 4 decades, and she did the math the way only a bookkeeper can do the math. She was 73 years old. She had her own savings, modest, around $42,000, in a money market account she had kept since before her marriage. She had Social Security. She had no recent work history that any employer would take seriously. She had no children of her own to call. The house she had cleaned and decorated and made into a home for 38 years was being measured for resale around her body. The Cedar Creek property would be a shed. Garrett had said so out loud. Even if it was a habitable structure, it sat in a part of Texas Loretta could not place on a map without using her phone, somewhere northwest of Austin, somewhere in the hill country, somewhere whose name she had never once heard her husband say. She thought about checking into a residence inn for a month while she sorted out her options. She thought about calling her old college roommate in Tulsa, the one she had not spoken to in 11 years, to ask whether the spare room above the garage was still available. She thought in her lowest moments around 3 a.m. about the actuarial likelihood of a 73-year-old widow with $42,000 to her name making it through the next decade with any dignity at all. She did not sleep more than 3 hours a night for the entire month. On day 29, Loretta was washing 2 coffee cups at the kitchen sink when she heard Garrett and Marisol talking in the breakfast nook. They were not whispering. They had stopped whispering around her 2 weeks ago. Marisol said, "I cannot believe Daddy left her even that ranch. $50,000 for a falling down shed in the middle of nowhere is $50,000 we could have had." Garrett said he felt guilty. 38 years is a long time to keep a secretary on the payroll without a bonus. Marisol laughed, the small, dry laugh she used at charity luncheons. She said, "Well, at least she will have a roof. Most women her age and her position would be at the YMCA." Loretta gripped the edge of the porcelain sink so hard her wedding ring left a small mark in her palm. 38 years of training kept her mouth shut. She rinsed the cups. She dried them. She put them in the cabinet to the left of the stove the way she had put them there every day since 1987. And then she walked upstairs to the master bedroom and started loading her car. She took 3 suitcases of clothes. She took the banker's box of family photographs. She took the wedding picture from the mantel, even though Garrett had told the stager it stayed with the house. She took her mother's cross-stitch, her father's pocket watch, the small leather Bible her grandmother had given her at confirmation, and the rosemary plant from the kitchen windowsill in a coffee can. That was all. 38 years in a Cadillac trunk. Garrett came home at 11:30 to make sure she actually left. He stood in the driveway with his arms crossed while she closed the trunk lid. He said, "The movers are coming at 1, and then said nothing else. Loretta opened the driver's door. She looked at him over the top of the car, this boy she had driven to baseball practice for 6 years and to grief counseling for 2, this man who could no longer meet her eyes. She said, "Garrett, I want you to know one thing. I never asked your father for 1 cent that wasn't ours together. Not 1 cent in 38 years. You go ahead and check the books." Garrett's mouth tightened. He did not answer. Loretta got into the car and pulled out of the driveway and did not look in the rearview mirror. The drive to Ardmore Springs took just over 4 hours. She took I-10 west out of Houston, then turned north onto US 281, a little past San Antonio, and the land changed under her tires the way it always does in Texas, flat coastal prairie giving way to rolling green country, then to the harder, bone-colored hills of the southern Edwards Plateau. She passed cattle. She passed Mennonite farm stands selling jam. She passed 3 abandoned gas stations and 1 new Buc-ee's the size of an aircraft hangar. Her GPS told her to turn left 20 miles past Marble Falls onto a state highway she had never driven, and then to turn again onto a county road that climbed slowly through cedar and live oak and outcroppings of pale limestone. She drove with both hands on the wheel and Wendell's note flat on the passenger seat next to her purse. Ardmore Springs announced itself with a green sign that said Population 612, and the population was almost entirely contained on a single main street that curved gently around an old Spanish mission-style courthouse. There was a feed store, a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Rosie's open 6 to 2, a bank, a small Episcopal church, a cafe, a general store with a wood front porch that looked like it had been there since the railroad came through. Loretta drove slowly down Main Street looking for a place to stop and ask directions, and she noticed something that did not make sense to her tired mind. People were watching her car. Not in the way small-town people watch any unfamiliar car. They were watching it the way you watch for someone you have been expecting. An old man on a bench outside the feed store stood up when her Cadillac passed. He took his hat off. A woman watering hanging baskets outside the cafe set down her watering can and walked to the edge of the porch. 2 teenage boys leaning on a pickup truck stopped talking and looked. None of them waved. None of them smiled. They just looked, the way you look at the long-awaited arrival of someone whose name you have known for years. Loretta pulled into a diagonal parking space in front of the feed store because her hands had started to shake and she needed to breathe. Before she had finished cutting the engine, the front door of the feed store swung open and a small, sturdy woman in her late 60s came down the wooden steps 2 at a time. She had iron gray hair pulled back in a clip and a green apron with the words Sutcliffe Feed and Seed stitched across the front in white. She walked straight to Loretta's window. She bent down. She put both hands flat on the doorframe and she said, "You must be Loretta. We have been waiting on you a long time, sweetheart." Loretta could not speak for a long moment. The woman at her window did not rush her. She just kept her hands on the doorframe and waited, the way a person waits with a horse that has come a long way and is still deciding whether to trust the pasture. "I'm Loretta," she said finally. "Loretta Bishop. I'm looking for 1187 Cedar Creek Road." The woman nodded as if this were the most ordinary statement in the world. She said, "I'm Ramona Sutcliffe. I run the feed store, and I have been a friend of your husband for 31 years. The place you're looking for is about 4 miles up that road there past the courthouse, on the left where the cedars start to thicken. Hollis is up there waiting on you. He has been waiting on you since Wendell passed." Loretta heard the words and could not arrange them into a sentence that fit anything she knew about her own life. 31 years. Wendell had been coming here for 31 years. Ramona seemed to understand without being told. She said, "I'll ride out with you, sweetheart, if it's all the same. There's some groceries in the back of my truck I was bringing up anyway. The pantry's stocked, but Hollis and I figured you'd want fresh eggs and milk for the morning." She climbed into the passenger seat without waiting for permission, and Loretta, who had not let a stranger into her car since 1979, found herself starting the engine and following Ramona's directions out of town. The road ran straight north for 2 miles past a small white-pillared cemetery, then turned east at a stand of pecan trees, then climbed gently into hills the color of wheat and bone. Cedar trees thickened on both sides of the road. The afternoon light came through them in long, slanted columns the color of weak tea. The driveway to 1187 Cedar Creek was marked by a simple wooden gate open, with a hand-painted sign on the crossbeam that read, "Whispering Cedars," in letters Loretta recognized at once as Wendell's hand. He had written every Christmas card she had ever received from him in that same slant. She stopped the car. She put her forehead against the steering wheel for a moment. Ramona did not speak. When Loretta lifted her head, she drove through the gate and up a long, curving drive lined with white limestone, and at the end of the drive she saw the ranch. It was not a shed. The main house was built of Pale Hill Country limestone and oiled cedar timber, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and a steeply pitched green metal roof. To the left, a long stable ran 120 feet, painted barn red, with 12 clean stall doors hanging open to the spring afternoon. Behind the stable, 3 white-fenced paddocks rolled out across the high ground, and in the nearest paddock, 12 horses were grazing. They were not ordinary horses. Loretta had ridden as a girl in Oklahoma, and she knew a quarter horse and a thoroughbred when she saw one. These were neither. They were small and compact and dust-colored, with thick manes and intelligent heads, and one of them, a buckskin mare with a black dorsal stripe down her spine, lifted her head as the Cadillac came up the drive and watched it with the steady interest of an animal that had been around people her whole life. "Spanish Mustangs," Ramona said quietly. "Heritage stock. Wendell rescued the first 3 from a kill pen in Bowie in 1994. There are 41 of them now scattered across the property. Hollis can tell you all of them by name." A man was already walking down the front steps of the main house. He was in his late 70s, weathered and lean, in a faded denim shirt and a straw hat going soft at the brim. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and took the hat off, the way the old man at the feed store had taken his off. He held it in both hands. "Mrs. Bishop," he said, "I am Hollis Pendergast. I have been the foreman on this ranch since 1987. Your husband told me about you on the 3rd day I worked here, and he has been telling me about you every visit since. Welcome home, ma'am." Loretta got out of the car on legs that did not quite belong to her. She walked across the gravel toward the house. Hollis did not approach her. He waited at the steps, hat in his hand, the way a man waits when he understands that the woman in front of him is carrying more than she can hold. The front door of the main house was unlocked. Hollis pushed it open for her and stepped back. Loretta walked inside. She stopped 3 feet into the foyer, and she made a small sound she did not recognize as her own. The walls of the entry hall, the long living room beyond it, the staircase wall going up to the 2nd floor, every flat surface that could hold a frame, were covered in photographs of her. There were hundreds of them. Loretta on the front steps of her parents' house in Tulsa at 20, her hair longer than she remembered. Loretta in the garden of the River Oaks place at 38. kneeling in dirt with a trowel in her hand. Loretta laughing at something off camera at someone's wedding in the late 90s. Loretta asleep in a porch rocker she had never seen, on a porch she had never sat on, with afternoon light across her face. Loretta reading at her kitchen table on what looked like a Tuesday morning in a robe she had owned for 20 years. Some of the photographs she remembered being taken. Most of them she did not. Wendell had carried a camera in his briefcase her whole marriage, and she had thought nothing of it. He was a Houston attorney. Houston attorneys carried things in their briefcases. Hollis stayed in the doorway. Ramona set the grocery bag on a console table just inside the entry and said quietly, "The kitchen is through to the right, sweetheart. We'll let you walk it on your own. We'll be on the porch." Loretta walked through the house the way a woman walks through a museum dedicated to her own life. The living room was simple and warm, wide pine plank floors, a stone fireplace with a cedar mantel, 2 leather chairs that had been sat in often, broken into the shape of a man's body, a hand-loomed wool rug in cream and rust. The kitchen had a long farmhouse table and a deep enamel sink under a window that looked out across the paddocks. There was an iron pot rack hung with copper. There were photographs on every wall. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms, all simply furnished. The largest one, the one with the windows facing east toward the hills, had a 4-poster bed and a small writing desk in the corner. On the writing desk in the middle, set carefully on a leather blotter, was a thick cream envelope. The envelope had her name written across the front in Wendell's hand. "For my Loretta. Open when you are ready." She sat down on the edge of the bed. She held the envelope in her lap for almost 10 minutes before she opened it. Inside, 6 pages of cream stationery, both sides. Wendell's slanted, careful handwriting from the first line to the last. "My darling Loretta, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have driven up that road, and Hollis has met you on the porch with his hat in his hand. I am sorrier than I know how to put down on paper that this is how you had to find out. Loretta, the will I left in Philip's office is the cruelest document I ever wrote. I wrote it that way on purpose. My children have spent 20 years circling my estate plan the way buzzards circle a dying calf. Every kindness I tried to put in your direction during my lifetime, they found a way to challenge or to poison. I made a decision somewhere around the 15th year of our marriage that the only way to protect you was to give them what they wanted in plain view and to give you what mattered in a place they would never think to look. The ranch came to me from my father's older brother, Calhoun Bishop, in 1986. He left it to me on the express condition that it shelter someone I loved. I started coming up here 3 months after we married. I deeded the property to you on August 14th, 1987, 6 months after our wedding, in a separate transaction recorded in Burnett County, not Harris. The deed has been in your name for 38 years. It is not part of my estate. It cannot be challenged. Philip has the original recorded copy in a safe in his office. The Galveston firm Garrett's lawyer just hired will discover this in approximately 4 to 6 weeks, and there will be nothing they can do. The 41 Mustangs are part of an active 501c, Honor 3, called the Cedar Creek Heritage Trust. The trust owns the herd, funds 2 veterinary positions in town, and is fully endowed for the next 40 years. You are listed as the lifetime chairwoman. I also want you to know that for the last 26 years, this ranch has quietly funded a relief organization that helps women leaving violent marriages in the 4-county area. We have placed 312 women and 588 children in safe housing. None of them know my name. Hollis and Ramona run the intake. The records are in the study downstairs. Now the harder part of this letter. In the bottom drawer of the writing desk you are sitting at, there is a locked metal box. The key is the one you used to come through the front door. Open the box only if Garrett, Marisol, or Tucker make any move against you. What is inside that box will end them. I never used it. You will not need to either unless they force your hand. Be ready, my girl. They will try. The letter ended with Wendell's signature and one final line. I loved you the way you deserved to be loved. I am only sorry I loved you so badly in public. Loretta sat on the edge of the 4-poster bed for a long time. The afternoon light moved across the pine floor, then up the wall, then began to fade. Somewhere outside, a horse called and another one answered. She heard the small sounds of Hollis and Ramona on the porch, the creak of a rocker, the strike of a match, the soft murmur of voices not meant to be overheard. She read the letter twice more. The second time, she did not cry. The third time, she cried in a way she would not have recognized as her own. the deep, ugly, unsentimental cry of a woman who has just discovered that her life has been longer and stranger, and more loved than she ever knew. When she came back downstairs, Hollis and Ramona had set out 3 plates on the porch and a covered dish of chicken and dumplings that Ramona's daughter-in-law had brought up. They ate together in the soft hill country dusk. Hollis told her the names of all 12 mares in the front paddock and the story of the buckskin, who was named Adelita and had foaled twice in the back pasture. Ramona told her about the Women's Shelter Network, what was called the Cedar House, and how the intake calls came through her own kitchen line in town because nobody would think to trace them there. They did not push her. They did not ask her what she planned to do. They just sat with her and they fed her, and around 9 they walked to their trucks and left her alone in the house for the first time. She slept that night in one of the smaller bedrooms with the door open and a quilt pulled up to her chin, and for the first time in a month she slept 8 hours straight. 2 weeks went by. Loretta moved through the rooms of the ranch slowly, the way a woman moves through a house she is not yet sure is hers. She unpacked her 3 suitcases. She put her mother's cross-stitch on the wall in the kitchen. She set the rosemary plant in the kitchen window above the sink. She walked out to the paddocks every morning at 6 with Hollis and learned the Mustangs by name, starting with Adelita and working through the herd. She met Pastor Eli Crowder at the small Episcopal church in town on the second Sunday, and shook his hand at the door, and he told her that her husband had paid for the new HVAC system 3 winters back and asked the church not to acknowledge it. She met Dr. Inez Vasquez, the town veterinarian, who came out twice a week to check on the herd and who had been on Wendell's payroll, in her words, since she was a third-year vet student. Every person Loretta met in Ardmore Springs had a story about her husband she had never heard. Every story was about a quiet act of generosity Wendell had done and asked never to be named for. The man she had been married to in River Oaks for 38 years and the man who had walked these hills for 38 years were the same man. She had only ever met half of him. On the 15th day, the call came from Philip Reyes Whitlock. Loretta, Garrett has retained a Houston firm. They are filing in probate court on Monday. They are arguing the ranch was a fraudulent conveyance, that Wendell concealed a marital asset, and that the entire property and the trust should be folded back into the estate and divided 4 ways. They are also arguing diminished capacity in the years he made the arrangements. They are coming hard, Loretta. I want you to be ready. Loretta thanked him, and she hung up the phone, and she walked into the small study off the living room. She opened the bottom drawer of the writing desk. She took out the locked metal box. The rusty iron key turned in the lock the same way it had turned in the front door. Inside the box were 3 manila folders labeled in Wendell's neat hand: Garrett, Marisol, Tucker. She did not open them in any rush. She sat at the writing desk and she opened Garrett's folder first, and she read it slowly all the way through, the way a bookkeeper reads a long set of books she is being asked to certify. Then she opened Marisol's, then Tucker's. By the time she was done, it was almost dark and she had not turned on a lamp. She sat in the gathering dark and she did not feel triumphant, the way she had thought she might feel. She felt tired and she felt clear, and she felt the small, hard certainty of a woman who has finally been given a tool that fits her hand. 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, a black Mercedes SUV came up the drive at Whispering Cedars. Loretta was on the porch with a cup of tea. She watched it park. She watched all 3 of them get out. Garrett in a navy blazer, Marisol in dark sunglasses she did not remove, Tucker on his phone as always, ending a call as he closed the car door. They walked up the gravel path together, and Loretta saw the moment they took in the ranch the way she had taken it in 2 weeks earlier. The limestone house, the barn, the white-fenced paddocks, the horses, the careful, expensive, deliberate beauty of a place no one had told them existed. She watched Garrett's jaw tighten. She watched Marisol's sunglasses slip a half-inch down her nose. She watched Tucker put his phone away for the first time in a decade. She stood up. She did not smile. "Come in," she said. "There is coffee in the kitchen." She sat them at the long farmhouse table. She poured 3 cups of coffee. She set out a plate of pecan shortbread Ramona had brought up that morning. She sat at the head of the table, the seat Wendell had always taken when he was here, and she folded her hands in front of her, and she waited for them to speak. Garrett cleared his throat. He said, "Loretta, we are not here to upset you. We are here because there has been an oversight in the estate planning. This property and this trust should have been part of the estate. Our father was not himself in his final years, and we believe a court will agree with us. We came to offer you a settlement before this gets ugly." Loretta did not answer right away. She took a sip of her coffee. She set the cup down precisely on the saucer. She said, "Garrett, I am going to tell you 3 things, and I am going to tell them to you once. The first thing is that the deed to this property was recorded in Burnett County in August of 1987. It is in my name. It has been in my name for 38 years. Philip has the original. Your Houston firm will discover this on Monday afternoon when they pull the recording, and they will tell you in language softer than mine that the case is closed before it opens. The second thing is that this ranch funds a women's shelter network. 312 women, 588 children. They will not be touched. They will not become collateral in your effort to take a piece of land you did not know existed 2 weeks ago. The third thing," she stood up. She walked to the small study off the living room. She came back with 3 manila folders, and she set Garrett's in front of him, Marisol's in front of Marisol, Tucker's in front of Tucker. She did not sit back down. "I have not opened them in your presence," she said. "I will not open them in your presence today. But I have read all 3. Your father kept them for 30 years. He never used a single page. I am not your father. I am a 73-year-old woman who has been stepped on for 38 years by people who are supposed to be my family. And I am telling you now, plain, that if you file on Monday, I will release every page in those folders to the Houston Chronicle, the Texas Bar, and the Internal Revenue Service before lunch on Tuesday." The room was quiet enough to hear the wall clock. Garrett looked down at the folder under his hand. He did not open it. He did not need to. Marisol's sunglasses had come the rest of the way off. Tucker's coffee had gone untouched. Loretta said, "Finish your coffee, please. Then I would like you to leave my house." They did not finish the coffee. They stood up. They walked out without speaking. The Mercedes pulled away down the gravel drive, and Loretta watched it go from the porch with both hands flat on the porch rail. Then she went inside, and she sat down at the kitchen table, and she let herself shake for 10 full minutes before she stood back up and put on a pot of soup. Garrett, Marisol, and Tucker did not file on Monday. The Houston firm that had been hired to take Loretta apart spent 4 days reviewing what they were given, and on the following Friday, a young associate from that firm called Philip Reyes Whitlock and informed him, in the careful flat tone of a person reading from a memo, that his clients had decided not to proceed with the probate challenge at this time. Philip thanked him and hung up the phone, and then he called Loretta from his car in the parking garage of his office building, and he laughed for almost a full minute before he could speak. "It is over," he said when he had himself together. "They are not coming, Loretta. Not now. Not ever, if you stay quiet about those folders." Wendell would have laughed at this for a week. Loretta did not laugh. She thanked him, and she hung up, and she walked outside to the porch, and she stood there a long time looking out at the paddocks. The buckskin mare lifted her head from the grass and looked back at her in that level, ancient way the Mustangs had. Loretta nodded once, the way you nod at someone you have decided to trust, and she went back inside the house. The summer turned. The hill country dried out and went gold. The cedar trees held their dark green against the heat. Loretta learned to drive Hollis's old Ford pickup along the back fence line. She learned which of the 41 Mustangs would come to her hand and which would not. And she learned that Adelita would always come and that Adelita's foal, a small bay colt named Reyes, would always follow. She learned the names of the women who answered the intake line in Ramona's kitchen, and the names of the families they had placed across 4 counties in the last 12 months. She learned to say her own name in town the way the people in town said it back to her, with a small dropped S at the end of the first syllable, the way a hill country person says it. The River Oaks house sold in October to a young couple from Atlanta. Garrett, Marisol, and Tucker discovered in the closing paperwork that Wendell had taken out a substantial line of credit against the property in the last 18 months of his life and never paid it down. They discovered that the partnership equity in the firm was held in a charitable trust they could only draw from in small annual increments, and only if they were currently employed and had passed a yearly ethics review by an independent trustee Wendell had appointed years ago. They discovered that the Galveston condominium had a pending special assessment of $186,000 for foundation repair from saltwater intrusion. They discovered, in short, that their inheritance was a maze with their father's quiet humor built into every wall. Loretta heard about all of it from Philip in long updates over the phone. She did not feel pleasure at any of it, and she did not feel sorrow either. She felt the way a bookkeeper feels when a difficult set of books finally balances. She felt the math close. In November, on a cold blue afternoon, Loretta opened the bottom drawer of the writing desk in the master bedroom one more time and found a second cream envelope she had missed the first time. It was tucked behind the metal box, flat against the back of the drawer. Across the front, in Wendell's hand, were the words, "For your second chapter. Open when the first one is over." Inside was the deed to a second property, 60 acres adjoining the ranch on the northern boundary, with a small farmhouse and 3 outbuildings recorded in her name in 1996. There was also documentation of a separate trust in the amount of $1.4 million established under the name the Loretta Mae Foundation, with no purpose specified. The note that came with it was 4 lines. Loretta, the first ranch was for what we built together. This second piece is for what you build without me. I do not know what it will be. You will. Whatever it is, build it for the women who arrive late, the way you arrived. I trust you with this more than I have trusted anyone with anything in my life. Wendell. Loretta sat at the writing desk for a long time. Then she got up and walked downstairs, and she called Ramona at the feed store, and she said, "I think I have figured out what we are going to do with the North 60. By the following spring, the small farmhouse on the North 60 had been cleaned out, repainted, and re-roofed. The 3 outbuildings had been converted into private cottages, 4 sleeping rooms each, with simple kitchens and screened porches that faced east toward the rising sun. A long communal dining hall had been built in cedar and limestone next to the original farmhouse. A chapel without a denomination was built at the top of the rise, where the live oaks ran together. The whole place was named, after some discussion, the Adelaide House, in honor of Wendell's first wife, the woman who had died young and whose 3 children had spent the rest of their lives mistaking grief for entitlement. Loretta chose the name herself. She felt it was right. She felt it was the only name that made the ledger balance. The Adelaide House opened that fall as a retreat for women over the age of 70 who had recently lost a husband and did not know what came next. It was free. It was small, never more than 16 women at a time. It ran for 4-week sessions. There was a vegetable garden and a meditation walk and a horse and grief program that paired each woman with one of the heritage Mustangs for an hour every morning. There was a small library of books chosen by Loretta herself and a thick guest book in the dining hall that every woman signed before she left. The first session filled within 10 days of the announcement going up on a single bulletin board in a single Methodist church basement in Marble Falls. The second session filled in 3 days. By the 3rd year, there was a waiting list 2 years long, and 3 other small towns in Texas had asked Loretta whether she would consider helping them set up something similar. She always said yes. She drove out to meet them in Hollis's Ford pickup with Ramona in the passenger seat and a thermos of coffee between them. A young single mother named June Tallchief came up the drive at Whispering Cedars in the 2nd year looking for work. Her husband had walked out on her and her 2 children, and she had heard from a friend in town that the ranch sometimes hired. Loretta hired her on the spot, taught her the bookkeeping over 6 months, and within 2 years, June was running the financial side of both the Heritage Trust and the Adelaide House. Loretta watched her at the desk one afternoon, 26 years old, hair tied back, a pencil behind her ear, and she remembered being 26 in a Houston accounting office, and she felt something settle in her chest that she could not name. On a Sunday afternoon in late October, 3 years after the day she had driven out of River Oaks for the last time, Loretta sat on the porch of Whispering Cedars with a cup of tea. The cedars were turning the dust gold color they turn in the fall. Adelita was in the front paddock with Reyes, who was no longer a colt and had grown into the same buckskin coat as his mother. Hollis was on the south fence with a wire stretcher. June's 2 children were running across the yard with one of Ramona's grandchildren. The Adelaide House had 11 women in residence that week. The Cedar House Network had placed 41 new families since spring. Loretta was 76 years old. She had buried her husband at 73, thinking the rest of her life would be a slow, dark room. The room had turned out to be a gate. She thought about what she would say if she were ever asked to a woman who had just been handed her own version of a rusty iron key. She thought she would say this: "The people who counted you out did not have the courage to count you correctly. The man who loved you, if he loved you well enough, found a way. And if he did not, you will." 73 is not the end of the ledger. 73 sometimes is the year the books finally balance, and you start writing the second set in your own hand. She finished her tea. She set the cup down on the porch rail. She walked out across the gravel toward the front paddock to call Adelita up to the fence. The dust gold light caught her white hair as she walked, and a stranger driving past on Cedar Creek Road that afternoon would not have known they were looking at a woman who had been left with nothing and had built, in her 7th decade, a small, good kingdom. Out of a key, she had been told, was a punishment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.